doing a introduction of himself. So let's hear from him. Uh, Thank you, Bhishma, and please get started. Yeah.
Thank you, Rupam. So, a bit of an introduction for myself. My name is Bhishma Narula, and I'm going to take the security code review, which is the first line of defense for any one of the security testers in the play to look at the code aspect of the code aspect of the applications. And a bit about myself. I've completed my BTech from in Information Technology from Mumbai University, then the Executive MBA, and after that, I have a 5 years of experience in the cybersecurity domain, and started my career with the organization Deloitte, wherein I was introduced to the cybersecurity world, and currently I'm working with Hive Pro as a lead pen tester, and my expertise lies in the web applications and infrastructure, mobile application vulnerability assessments, and pen testing. And I spend major of my part with the secure code reviews as a part of my prior firm Deloitte, and in that I have also done some of the cyber threat profiling. So, continuing with today's talk on code security review, let me quickly take you towards the agenda. So today we are looking at what is code security review, what is actually done in the code security review, why the code security review is important, because being the first step, as you know, that if there's no application, there's no security to be considered for any kind of organizations. They have their assets, they have everything, but they have their tangible asset in the form of applications which actually provide them with the finances, which actually leads an organization towards the future. So building them requires a code, and those codes need to be secure. So why code security is important? Then we would come up with what's in it for the development teams, because code security review is something which is done at the security testers end as well as at the development teams end. So it's a mix of both development and security. That's why, as of now, it has been come up to be a major part of the development life cycle, and we have something known as DevSecOps into play, which is now a major thing into each and every organization. Then we would look at the code security review approach, how basically a code security review is done in terms of its methodologies. And after that, we're going to go a bit technical on the common vulnerabilities that are found in our codes, and the remediation at the code level itself, how you can go ahead with remediating those vulnerabilities in general sense. And after that, we would go ahead with our question and answer round, and we would end up this session. So quickly going towards what is code security review. A code security review is a specialized task to review an application source code, and I say it to be a specialized task because it not just requires a security tester's knowledge or methodology and approach to find out vulnerabilities, but it also requires a developer's mindset to know how the data is actually flowing in your application. If you know like a developer what the application is actually doing, where the data is flowing and what all entry points or exit points could lead to security related vulnerabilities or weaknesses in your code itself. And that's when you can hit the spot, and where you require the fixes and how this is done. So that's why it's a specialized task to consider. Going towards why security review, as I said, the code review and code security review is the first step of a security audit, because organizations these days need to make sure that they are secure enough. They need to provide some kind of assurance to their customers to go ahead and use their applications. So doing that would require a security audit, which once published makes the customers believe in the organization and their applications. So the goal of the security review is to identify security related weaknesses which are usually present in your application, and to go ahead and fix them, because almost 75% of the remediations that happen at a code level itself. We know there are dynamic application security testing for websites, for infrastructure, for your assets. But then again, everything comes down to the code level, because if there is no code, there's no application itself. So that's why most of the remediation happens at the code level itself. Going on, the emphasis is on implementing security in the development phase of the software development lifecycle. So, in the earlier days, what used to happen is code review was something which usually used to happen after the application code is built. And once that is done, it was just considered to be a major one of the steps in the waterfall life cycle, wherein once the application is developed completely, it goes to code security review. But as of now, the kind of costs which are being shared, uh, if a vulnerability is found at a code level which requires a fix afterwards, because the kind of costs that are being shared, it is being emphasized on that we need to implement security in the development lifecycle of the code itself. So starting from the reviews and to the development of the code in their to the development stages, we have tools with us, we have manual reviews with us, which makes sure that once the application is developed in its prior versions, it is going ahead and going as a secure code, so that there is nothing major to be found as a key vulnerability in your applications. And the methodology which is basically being followed is a manual review along with a SAST. SAST is static application security testing, which is majorly done by tools, because the applications nowadays are huge and complex in nature. So it's very hard for a complete manual review to be done from the tester end or from the development end. So they make sure that they are using some kind of automated tools to help them locate a prior vulnerabilities, and from there can go ahead with the manual review to fetch some more information and more endpoints and entry and exit points for the data, so that they can realize how secure the code is or what needs to be done in terms of securing the. Now, what's in it for the developers? As I've already said, secure code review is a combination of two separate job titles: security testers and developers as well, because it requires you to get familiarizing with the technology stack. You being a developer or you being a security tester needs to familiarize yourself with the technology stack to know what kind of functionalities are available, so that once you have a standardized solution with you in terms of a secure code, you can go ahead and you reuse it, and you can go ahead and check at your end if those kind of standard solutions are present. It would help in reducing your timeline in introducing error to your code, or you can say have a security test. So, quickly giving you an example over here, if you already have a standardized solution for the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, as a part of development team, you can reuse those kind of codes with the same technology stack into your another application. And being a part of a security testing team, if you are familiarized with those kind of solutions which are already present, you just have a check in this source code, and just by a look, you know that the code is secure, and you can go ahead and reduce the timeline of your testing activities. And doing this as a part of development team, it helps in having an early fix, and additional time can be spent by the development team to focus on the new features of your applications. And at the same time, the security testing team can go ahead and explore more and more on other parts of your application code by just having a look at the secure code reviews that these particular sections are already secure in terms of the standardized solutions which are being provided. And as I've already said before, you're going to have an identify the entry and exit point of the data in your application, which can help you more to realize where all your security your code can go wrong, and a hacker can introduce malicious or a malicious script or data into your application. How the data would be exiting and how your browsers could be behaving in terms of taking those data into account. Now, moving forward to the code security review approach, the approach which is usually followed is, as I've already said, an automated scan is being performed in case you have a large application stack which is complex in nature, and a complete manual review is not which is recommended, because there could be some kind of bottlenecks in doing so. But an automated tools like Fortify, Checkmarks, or Veracode are of great help, because they take into account the application as a whole. They try to understand the data flow, the application flow, and based upon the rules which they have inbuilt in those security tools, they can point us towards the entry and exit point of the data application where the security vulnerabilities could be present, and those can then be used to have a starting point or a head start for a manual review, because you already know the data points and you already know the code points and snippets wherein you think that the automated tool is taking it to be vulnerable, and a manual review over that can assurance to check for a security vulnerability which can be present or not. And the next step, which involves in a code security review, is applying of the code fixes. And once those code fixes are performed at the development team's end, you go ahead for a revalidation and you completely again follow the life cycle in your DevSecOps process. So this is the basic code security review approach, which is being formulated in general terms. And now moving towards the technical part of it, wherein we majorly see the common vulnerabilities and how these vulnerabilities are introduced at a code level and how these vulnerabilities are usually fixed. Moving towards injection. Injection is the very common vulnerability which are being found in the application source code. And moving towards the first injection vulnerability is the SQL injection. As we already know, that SQL injection is the ability of an attacker to change the context of an SQL query to the entry point, which causes the data to be interpreted as a part of the query. So these data points are interpreted as a query to the SQL language, and a hacker can go ahead to manipulate it to fetch information from your databases. So these are usually found at a code level, wherein the parameterization and whitelisting is not performed for the application code data entry point, and the remediation itself is to use parameterized queries and data whitelisting if parameterization is not possible. What is data whitelisting and data validation is that wherever you are using the application data which is coming from a user end, you usually go ahead and validate it to be something which is expected from a normal user and not from a hacker or a malicious user. If you're expecting a data to be a name, then you should make sure that it's something like in numeric in alphabetical format, or if you are expecting something in alphanumeric format, then that data goes through a regular expression check so that it belongs to that particular data set and it is not allowing a malicious user to input some kind of crafted SQL query which can help them to gain more information out of your databases. Another aspect of a remediation is parameterization. What it does is it splits your SQL query call into two aspects, wherein you construct a query first, you make it, you compile, you have a prepared statement ready for it, and once the prepared statement is ready and the user input is being provided, you then go ahead bind that user parameter into the query so that it is not interpreted. The user data is not interpreted as a query language in itself. So moving ahead, how these kind of remediations could be applied to different languages. The very first language which comes to play is Java. So in Java, as you can see over here, a normal insecure way of coding is through construction of a string query wherein there's a select statement and the user ID is appended as it is when it is coming from a user data, and the password as well. But a more secure way over here is to split the application source code into two ways, wherein a query is being constructed along with the placeholders. The username is used to have a placeholder with a question mark, wherein it is not being assigned through a user data as such as of now. And a prepared statement is being constructed. The prepared statement, once constructed, it will now use the username which is being provided as part of a parameter. And if at all a malicious user is trying to provide, a malicious script or a malicious SQL query over here, it will be treated as a string and not as an SQL statement, because our statement is already being prepared at the code level. Moving ahead, the same which can be used as a part of an ASP.NET is to go ahead and create a query along with the placeholders, and again using that query and then adding the parameters at the end. Usually what happens is the development team over here they know that the code can be split into two things, wherein you have to have a prepared statement and then you need to find the user data along with them. But what usually they forget is they forget to all the prepared statement command at the very start. So what they usually do as a part of the common coding mistake is that they prepare the statement, they don't execute that prepared statement, but they go ahead and binding it and then execute those statements. That is now how it works. It is completely divided into parts, wherein you need to prepare the statement, you need to execute it, and then you need to bind the parameters to those statements to make sure that your code is being executed properly. Coming to PHP also provides us with parameterization, wherein a prepare statement can be used to prepare the statement, and then a bind parameter functionality is used to add the user parameter as part of your user over here as per this course. Coming to PHP again, PHP also uses the technology of PHP data objects, wherein PHP data objects are majorly compatible with all the largely used database drivers. So what PHP objects uses it directly uses parameterization. It doesn't use the user input directly into your application. It makes use of parameterization as a part of your application code. And once it is done, you can use a prepare statement to execute the code, and then binding parameters can also be used. You can also use the binding parameter into the execute statement in itself, wherein you don't need to use the bind param functionality in between. You can directly call it to the execute statement over here using the PHP. Coming to the Cold Fusion language, the Cold Fusion provides you the Cold Fusion query parameter tag to go ahead with the parameterization of your queries, wherein you can append it into the Cold Fusion query tags, and you can make use of the parameterization. Coming to XML injection and XFC attacks. So XML injection and XFC attacks is something wherein the attacker has the ability to manipulate the XML data and change the application XML through their injection attacks, or in an XFC attack, they try to use external entities and doc type definitions to manipulate the XML and try to incorporate some malicious content into your XML. So the immediate remediation for these kind of attacks at a code level is to encode the XML specific control languages, wherein if ever you see a user data consisting of an ampersand or specific control characters like open angular bracket, close angular bracket, or single quotes, you go ahead and encode them and use them accordingly. And another remediation method which can be seen is disabling of your doc type definitions and the external entities, and preventing those entities to enter into your application. So let us go ahead and see how it is being done at the code level. So as we know, Java provides us the builder functionality, wherein a builder factory builder class can be used to pass those XML inputs. But a more secure way of passing those inputs is at a configuration level to set that factory feature wherein it is not allowing your doc type declaration, and so that it is expecting a normal user input and not something from the doc type definition. If at all a malicious user is going ahead and trying to use the doc type definitions to incorporate their own definition and then make them use external entities over. Going ahead, in Java itself, we have a disabling of general and parameter entities, wherein you can set these features as part of your configuration while using your XMLs to set the features of usage of external general entities and external parameters entities to be false, so that it is not allowing you to load external DTVs as well. And apart from that, under the XML reader configurations, you can use the reader set feature functionality to disallow the doc type declaration, and load of external DTDs can be made false, so that you are expecting a normal input and not something which is malicious in terms of the hacker to be going ahead and using those. Coming to ASP.NET, the ASP.NET secure coding practices provide us the XML resolver functionality from the XML doc, which when set to null would disable the DTD allowance into your application XMLs. And at the same time, if you're using ASP.NET .NET's XML reader, it can use the settings.prohibit DTD feature to disallow the DTDs to be included in your application XML to the user. Going to PHP, PHP provides XML libraries for disabling the entity loader, and apart from that, it does not allow it allows you to it does not allow you to have disallow the doc type definitions. So what you can do is you can have a regular expression checks through a secure coding wherein you can pre-match your doc type regular expression into your XML if at all there is a user input being involved, so that you can make sure that doc type definitions are not being included as part of their XML through user inputs. Coming to Java for XML injection remediation, the Java Factory functionality provides a set validating feature wherein it goes ahead and, as I said already, it checks for the control characters which can be a part of an SQL XML injection, and it will make sure that it does not belong to those values, and if at all, it would go ahead and not include those in your XML injection attacks. Coming to Cold Fusion provides you the encoding of the special characters, wherein you can use the user parameters and pass them to the encode XML attribute functionalities. And once these are being done, it checks the user parameters to be from those particular format or not, and if at all, it goes ahead and encode those user inputs for you. Coming to the XPath injection vulnerabilities. XPath injection vulnerabilities are something which are similar to the SQL injection, wherein the attacker is trying to supply user supplied information and construct an XPath query, which can be used to manipulate your XML related data. And these are major of the issues as compared to SQL injection, because SQL injections are majorly performed on the databases, which has some kind of authentication, but XML is something which is being used for your data for the transfer purposes and to store your data. So that is where, in terms of authentication mechanisms, these XPath injections are more vulnerable and requires more attention in terms of your code security review, so that you're not providing the malicious user hackers an ability to inject the XPath queries, wherein they can provide those to fetch your XML information. So remediation at an XPath injection level again involves encoding of the control characters, wherein major of the control characters are the braces, equals sign, the single quotes, colon, and comma. And another remediation mechanism involved is parameterization of your XPath queries as well. So let us quickly go ahead and check how you can at a code level fix these using the encoding and parameterization. The Java provides you whitelisting, wherein you can check for the user input to the XPath queries. If you're using the user input in terms of your XPath queries, you can use them to first being validated at the character level, wherein you are not allowing these kind of characters in your XPath. And if at all you find something, you can go ahead and break the statements accordingly. Apart from that, Java also provides you the parameterization, wherein you can see there is a variable resolver class which can be used to add the variables after your XPath query is being generated. So your XPath query is being generated over here with the new XPath instance, and the variable XPath expression, once it is being compiled, along with the compilation, it is using the the parameterization over here, and along with the @ID, your user input is being provided. Similarly, ASP.NET provides this parameterization through your dynamic context class, wherein it has a compile function which already pre-compiles your XPath queries. And afterwards, there's a add variable functionality which can be used to bind these parameters which are used as variables to your already compiled XPath queries. Moving ahead to PHP, PHP will provide you with parameterization of your XPath queries. So the remediation methods which you can use over here is check of regular expression and using encoding mechanism. Wherein over here, if it's escaping, if it's found a single quotes in it XPath query which is provided by your user input. So whenever it finds something malicious, it's escaping those characters. Coming to Cold Fusion version 11 provides you the encode for XPath functionality feature, which can be used, to encode the special characters which are provided as part of your XPath queries. It's provided from user input. And in case you want to use parameterization queries, it can be done as well, along with the XML into the XML searches which are usually present in your application. Moving ahead to command injection. Command injection is the vulnerability wherein the user supplied malicious user if is used in terms of using to make your system calls. It can help an attacker to cause the application to execute an underlying operating system command. And the major reason, the major reason for this is if the user input is directly used to have a system call. So remediation at our end to avoid the command injection attack is to avoid inserting user supplied data directly into your OS commands. Maybe another remediation mechanism which can be used is hard coding the system calls, wherein it can be directly mapped to your user input. If the user is selecting something, it can be mapped as a part of your hard coded instance in your application source code, and it is calling those objects only. And different languages and frameworks provide you comprehensive set of standard libraries which are safer to make a system call and to use system calls to the user supplied data. So you can go ahead and make sure you're using those frameworks and libraries, which will allow you to explore more into how securely you can have the command calls and system calls into your application. So how these can be majorly done in Java is, having a regular expression check, and once these checks are being performed, and if any kind of malicious input is being detected, it can be replaced, and after the replacement, only you can go ahead to, execute those queries in terms of your system calls. Again, ASP.NET also provides you validation expression functionality, wherein you can check whether your the user input which is being provided is alphanumeric or not over here, and it does not contain any special characters which can lead to manipulation. And Cold Fusion technology also provides a re-replace parameter, wherein it checks the parameters to be alphanumeric or whitelisting of the characters, allowing only those characters which can be used to make system calls, and not allowing rest of the characters to be used. Again, under PHP, PHP provides you two functionalities: the escape shell argument and escape shell command. The escape shell argument is used when a user input is used as part of your arguments in your system calls. So what it actually does is it checks for those arguments, wherein it checks for the special characters, and once it has been found, it goes ahead not to be used in terms of system calls. And in escape shell commands, it checks for the complete command from the user. If it's a valid command, it does allows only then for the application to execute it. Otherwise, it does not execute those commands. And apart from that, it can also use whitelisting of the characters, wherein it can replace the special characters which can be used to manipulate your component. Now coming to cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting, as we already know, is one of the major vulnerabilities which can happen at the server level. And once it comes back to your client level, it can execute into your browser also. And the impact that it has is at various levels. It not only can fetch you information about your application and the databases, but it can also help an attacker to impersonate a user by hijacking their cookies and by stealing information related to valid sessions. And apart from that, it can also be used to deface your application. So it has major consequences. So and the basic cause for this is when the user data which is being provided is provided as a dynamic content and is sent to the application without being validated, and it is being executed as a part of their normal application flow. So one of the major remediation techniques for cross-site scripting would involve is the validation of your user input, wherein a regex validation of the requests and APIs and databases needs to be performed. And apart from that, escaping of malicious characters from the user inputs should also be taken care of. Along with that, once your server is executing your queries and giving it back at the client side, so an output encoding should also be ensured at a client side, so that they are not the browsers are not providing your information to the malicious users if they're trying to hijack your session or they're trying to get hold of your cookies. And apart from that, as part of your security measures, you can always use the HTTP security headers in terms of your XSS protection and content security policies, so that it is making sure that the user inputs which goes as part of your queries are validated and whitelisted, and even escaping is also performed. So coming to the fixes at the code level, when coming to Java, Java provides an OWASP ES API libraries which helps in encoding your user input for different attributes as well. If it's for HTML, you can use encode for HTML. If it's for JavaScript, you use encode for JavaScript. So, and if it is through the URL format, you can use encode for URL, because all the data, wherever it is being provided in terms of your applications, it needs to be an untrusted one. So you cannot trust those data, and from wherever it's trying to enter into your application, you need to make sure that it is being validated at all the ends. So Java provides you that with OWASP ES API libraries. And these Java encoders help in encoding your HTML in terms of your HTML request for HTML, for JavaScript attributes, for your URI components, and for your CSS URL as well. Wherever at an application level, wherever we can think of that an untrusted data can be provided in terms of malicious users. Coming to ASP.NET, it provides you with anti-XSS libraries, which provides the same functionality, because this library consists of all your malicious user inputs that can be provided, and it helps in encoding all those inputs before it is being used in your application. Coming to PHP, PHP use contextual encoding methods, wherein you can use your user inputs and you can provide them through the escape HTML functionality, and you can use no HTML as well checks, and it can call the anti-XSS libraries as well over here. Coming to CodeFusion, CodeFusion provides you the CodeFusion component tag, wherein you can use the anti-SAMI policies. Anti-SAMI policies is an XML document which consists of all your policies, consisting of the special characters which needs to be restricted from moving on. So you can incorporate this XML policy into your application, and whenever a user input is being provided, it goes ahead, checks it through these policies, and lets you know whether malicious content is present in your application or not. What it also provides is an is-safe functionality, wherein your HTML request can be passed to your is-safe functionality, and it provides you an output whether the HTML request which is being provided is safe or not. And along with that, it can also provide your request to safe HTML, wherein it will parse your request as an argument to the get safe HTML, and what you would be provided as an output would be a safe HTML file, which can then be used to be passed to your server side, which can be used for execution and processing. Coming to broken authentication, involves mechanisms in your source code, wherein a malicious user can go ahead and impersonate as your valid users, and these can be done in one of the other ways. And one of the ways to doing that is session fixation, wherein a malicious user is able to fix the session in terms of the valid users and make them use these fixed sessions so that he can also use to impersonate your validated users and perform action on his or her behalf. So, what is the cause of the session fixation activity? The session fixation usually happens due to bad coding practices at the developers end, wherein the developers not check the validity of your session identifiers and they can use any string to provide us session IDs. Uh, Along with that, the developers assigning the session ID before the user is logged in and not changing it as a part of your normal secure coding practices is also one of the reasons for session fixation. And apart from that, the developers accepting session IDs from get and post requests, which makes them vulnerable while transferring from your client side to your server side. So that makes it the major causes of session fixation. And as part of remediation, what you can do at a code level is to have session identifiers regenerate and reissue after each and every login. Once a person or a valid user logs out of your application, you need to make sure the session is invalidated and terminated there in itself and it cannot be used because majorly it can be used for replay attacks as well. Apart from that, there should be uniqueness to the session IDs and validating session IDs for every incoming request. If there is some kind of pattern to your session IDs that can be used by a malicious user to predict the next sessions, which can help them in session fixation. But if it is unique and random and there is no pattern in the generation, it's very much less likely for the malicious user to go ahead and fix your sessions. And apart from that, for each and every request which has been generated, the session needs to be validated so that it is making sure that the request is coming from a valid user or not. And you can also use HTTP security header attributes for your cookies because cookies are also used for the session management, and random generators should also be used, which used to make sure 128 to 256 bit long session IDs, so it makes it unique and random and not predictable. So coming at a code level, how we can go ahead and use the secure coding practices to do this is in Java, we can use the invalidate session functionalities to invalidate the session once the logout is being performed. And the Java Spring framework provides you with session fixation class, which can use to migrate sessions and other session related functionalities depending upon how we want to, migrate the sessions. If we want to generate new sessions, if we want to go ahead and terminate a session once a logout is being performed. So everything is there in these kind of libraries. Under ASP.NET, we are provided with functionalities such as session.clear, which clears the session after the logout, session.abandon, which abandons the session which can be used if you see some kind of malicious activity which is happening, and session.remove all, which removes all of your sessions so that it cannot be used ahead once you have performed the logout activity. So these functionalities can be used according to your application functions and your application failure criteria in terms of your sessions. PHP uses regenerate session functionality wherein it can help in regeneration of your session if there's a session timeout or if there is a logout activity being performed and you need to log in again. So these functionalities can be used in that. Coming to Code Fusion provides you with session rotate functionality, which makes sure that if there is a list of sessions which are already being used, it checks if your new session belongs to that particular group, and if it does, it does not allow you to use that particular session. Similar to not using previous few passwords, the password policy mechanism. So it helps in checking and rotation of your session activities. Now coming to the last part of your common vulnerabilities, which are unrestricted file uploads. We know that in today's world, data is something which is expected from the users as well, in order to comprehend it and make sure to get some knowledgeable information out of it. So what we also need to make sure as part of secure coding practices is that not trusting this user data at all, because any of your user can be a malicious user or a hacker who's trying to hack into your application, and the file upload functionality is one of the major entry points wherein they can go ahead and do that. They can go ahead and upload command injection related vulnerabilities through one of the files if you have unrestricted file upload vulnerabilities present in your application. So the attacker being able to send malicious files to your application through these functionality is the main cause for this kind of vulnerabilities. And the remediation which can be followed is not trusting the user related data at all. And by saying that, what I'm trying to say is that you need to validate the file name, you need to validate the file extension. If you are already expecting the PDF files from your users, you need to make sure that file extension is PDF. There should not be double extensions. You should make sure that double extension check is also there. You need to make sure that the file name which is being provided does not contain any malicious or scripting inputs. And apart from that, the content of your file, the content which is being uploaded by the user also needs to be checked. So there should be magic byte validation, because each and every type of data has their magic bytes. The initial bytes of your file content are fixed depending upon the type of file you're being uploaded. If it's an exe, it has a fixed magic byte. If it's a PDF, it has a fixed magic byte. So you need to check those as well. Apart from that, what needs to be ensured at a code level is enforcing an upper limit on the file size to be uploaded. If you are expecting your application to have a PDF, maybe 2 MB is the maximum PDF file size, depending upon what your application is using those data for processing. So you need to make sure that those kind of enforcement are present. Apart from that, you need to make sure the frequency of the calls which are being made to your file upload functionality. Because if there are many frequent calls being made, it can be related to some kind of malicious activity, which needs to be checked. And apart from that, the uploaded files should never directly be uploaded to the servers. It should have an intermediate steps wherein it should first go to your antivirus and malwares check server, wherein it checks for those viruses and malwares, and after that, if it gets a clean sheet, only then it should move to your production server. Then it's safe. So how can we make sure in terms of code level that we are not incorporating these kind of vulnerabilities through unrestricted file uploads? So this is one of the code snippets which provides you an insecure file upload functionality, wherein it's just fetching the file name through get field name. It gets the name, it gets the content type, it gets your contents, and it gets the size, and it's directly passing your file, at the server level, which is not a good idea to be done. You need to have some kind of validations to be present. So coming to the kind of validation which can be present is over here. It is checking for the metadata through the content type. Even if it's a JPEG file that the Java application is expecting, so it checks the metadata of a JPEG along with whatever you have been uploaded as a part of the user, and it gets a check through the content type, and if it matches, then it is making sure that it is forwarding your file to the server for further processing. Here in ASP.NET, as I told you, this is wherein we have an extension check. If it's only accepting PDF, it should check for PDF extensions. Along with that, what we have also incorporated is magic byte check as well. So the data which it starts. So this is the magic byte for a PDF file. Every PDF file would start with this as their content. So this needs to be checked at the code level. Coming to PHP is also here using the array, over where we are using the magic byte check for PNG, GIF, JPEG, and JPEF file formats. And apart from that, it is accepting only JPEG formats, so it's moving a file type check as well. Coming to Cold Fusion also have some functionalities wherein it can check for the acceptance of file extensions. Once it is accepting a file, it also provides you is image file functionality, wherein the user input or the user file which is once being provided Cold Fusion, it passes it to the is image file, and let us know that if the file which is being uploaded is actually an image file or not. And depending upon the output, you can go ahead to process the file or not in your application. So moving ahead with credit and references, the last part, because I'm majorly done with my the webinar. The credit goes for the code snippets to Spotify, because they majorly had these kind of code snippets for insecure coding mechanism. And you can have a look at the site as well for more major code snippets. And now opening to the questions.
Thank you, Bhishma. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Mhm.
One
Let
I have
me.
answered, the recording link. So everybody can visit the Null Open Security Community YouTube channel, and we'll upload these videos there. And the other one by Ishak, can you take a look, Bhishma?
Sure. Okay. Can you recommend XXC mitigation for application which requires external entities to be called because of business requirement? Okay. So what we can done is, as a part of a external entities check, the business should make sure that the kind of external entities which it requires in its applications. So maybe it can have a list of all those external references what it wants, and once it is accepting those inputs, it should check that those external entities actually belongs to those trusted sources only, if it actually wants those external entities to be part of their XML. So if at all it belongs to something malicious, they should not accept it. But if they want, if it belongs to some trusted source only, then they allow those kind of external entities to be included in their application.
There are a couple of more questions for
Sure.
you, Bhishma.
Okay. How automation is helping secure code reviews? So by automation, I mean automated scanning. So what's happening in a SaaS application is, the kind of organizational applications that we have, it is huge. You have different teams for different functionalities as such. And when those functionalities are taken into account, it provides you a complete application as a whole. So for a batch of few security testers, it's very difficult to just have a manual security review and check each and every functions, check each and every data entry and exit points. So what automation and automated tools provide you is a starting point wherein it can lead you towards probable uh, security vulnerability entry points like Fortify, checkmarks, and Veracode. What they do is they try to understand the code flow and they try to pinpoint application related vulnerabilities before that can be present. And from there on, you can see what kind of functionalities usually are vulnerable, and you can go ahead with manual review to check where all those functionalities are called next, and you can hop on from there to check if those are done in a secure manner or not.
There are more questions, Bhishma. You can take one by one.
Yeah, I'm just looking at them. Any book tutorial you recommend to practice and expertise secure code practice and more? So we have the Bible, which is OWASP Secure Code Review Guidelines, which needs to be followed by each and everyone to make sure that codes are secured from the application coding level itself. So you can use that to have expertise in secure coding practices. Okay, what criteria are reviewed when selecting a SaaS tool? So the criterias are varied depending upon what your organization is doing. So if your organization is using majorly all the technologies and all the languages, you need to make sure the SaaS tool is capable enough to pass your all the application code. So you can need to check if Fortify is better in those terms, if checkmarks is better in those terms. If it is using just Java, if your organization is just using Java, you need to make sure you need to have a market research, which of them is more useful for those. So you can make you have different criteria sets for those aspects, and accordingly you can decide upon the SaaS tools which you want. How much should the dev teams be involved via IDE integration to incorporate SaaS testing while coding? So nowadays, Fortify and other SaaS tools, what they're providing is security assistant plugins, wherein while the dev team is coding, they are led to know that whether they need to perform some kind of secure coding practices or not. So they should be majorly involved in that. What happens is if a normal development team is coding, uh, uh, just keeping in mind the application functionality and not in a secure way, they so at some point of time after the security testing they have to come back and they need to code it again in secure aspects. So they need to make sure that they are being involved from the very beginning itself. So they need to make sure that the kind of functionalities that they are coding are in secure manner through their IDEs, and through their IDE plugin itself, they can have a basic, SAST automation scan to be done so that they know where they are lagging in terms of coding security. How frequent SAST scanning took place? What's your preferring triggering in a pipeline? Like in a pipeline and the feedback controls, what's your input on and SAST? So in a pipeline, in a normal development lifecycle, what usually happens is as a part of your normal building activities. What I feel is definitely it can vary depending upon the kind of life cycle which, or the development DevOps life cycle which the organizations have. But what I have seen usually is that once in their build process, whenever a new functionality or whenever an application is being built, as a part of their CI/CD pipeline through Jenkins or through other CI/CD tools, as a part of their building activities, once a successful build is done in terms of your application code functionality, they call these SaaS tools to make sure that these vulnerability, if there are any kind of critical vulnerabilities are present in the application source code or not. And as a part of their post-build scripts, they check those scanning reports, and if they find something critical, they declare the build to be unstable, or they declare the build to be failed, so that the application is not going towards the deployment stage, or unit testing or functional testing stage in the very first place. They are making sure that these kind of builds are successful only when they are limiting to the kind of security vulnerabilities in terms of low issues, and only then they are moving towards functional testing, unit testing, and deployment at the application level. Yes, they do. So the idea over here is to have a delay in the very starting process and take those delay into account in the very starting, so that they are not facing any kind of issues afterwards. So if you're building an application, if I'm releasing the very new application, say for example on 25th, it's better I'm releasing it 1 week later in a secure manner than to release an application, identify that there are vulnerabilities, then have a rollback, then to fix those vulnerabilities and again, provide it to your customers. So you need to make sure that you are taking the security timelines in your pipeline also, and using those, you need to make sure that you're following those guidelines, so that if you're providing your application in production to your users, you're providing it in a secure manner. You don't need to go ahead and roll back and have bugs and then redeploy those functionalities.
Okay. Thank you, Bhishma, and Tibin and others who want to ask more questions or reach out to Bhishma directly. I guess he will be glad to share his email ID on chat, and you can reach
Sure.
out to him and post your questions to him, and he will answer you directly. In the interest of time, we have 4 more minutes left, so I will share a link now on chat, which is a link to add talks. So if you want to share, do any kind of talk with the community, because everything is pro bono and voluntary. So we are always looking for new speakers, new champions who are willing to share their knowledge. So you can let us know your interest on this link. Now, in the rest of the time, we can take any questions regarding today's session or the sessions in the past, or about null, or if you have any feedback regarding the session or how we can improve, please feel free to raise your hand, and then I will ask you to unmute and you can talk then. You can say anything. Doesn't It doesn't have to be related to what I said. Okay, I'm making everybody if all should be able to unmute now. So feel free to unmute and uh, share your experience or feedback about the session. And thank you for folks who are sharing on chat. You're welcome. So we are doing this ad hoc, and whenever speakers are available, so bear with us. And if you are interested to talk, please share your interest on the Google form. And if Anybody wants to say anything, or we can call it a wrap, and we'll meet everybody when we have new speakers for the next event. I'll wait for 10 more seconds and then I'll end the session otherwise. All right, it was great having you today, having everybody, and thank you to Bhishma and Shrikant who shared their knowledge today. And the presentations will be available on the Null website, and talk recordings will be available on the YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. See you next time. Bye.